Some of these places I've photographed many times, usually they're not such good pictures. It takes a long time to make a good picture, but if you keep working at it, sometimes things change and they get more interesting. The light changes. A place is never the same. I have been teaching and photographing in one way or another for 55 years. I'm Charles Traub. I'm a photographer, an educator, and I live here in New York, Manhattan. And I am the chairperson of the Photography, Video, and Related Media MFA program at the School of Visual Arts. I've always made pictures since I graduated from college. I took a course in my senior year in college. And I was very lucky. I met very great image makers, and I selected the right kinds of choices after I got out of both the Peace Corps and the Army at first to learn. I was in Chicago and went to the Institute of Design and started teaching at Columbia College in Chicago, which is now a very, very big school, both art, media, and social issues. After being there part-time for a certain amount of time, I was the other full-time person, and then subsequently became chairperson of that department and built further and created now the Chicago Museum of Contemporary Photography. And because of that history, my own photography was represented by Light Gallery here in New York, which was one of two most important galleries of the period. Because I was a photographer and organizer, they asked me to be director of the gallery, and I moved to New York, where I always wanted to live, because I always thought New York was Mecca, and certainly Mecca for the arts, and certainly a place where the passing show of people and energies was so exciting, and that I wanted to photograph in that real space. So I did it. And at that time, we were still fighting for the place of photography in the arts. And the job was more of a curatorial job than a sales job. But as it grew, it became a big business. And I knew that that wasn't really for me. I was an artist, a photographer, and I left the gallery and did freelance work. And subsequently, as I told you, I was hired here at SVA. I have done and edited a number of books, two with Adam Bell from the School of Visual Arts, sort of a collections of essays about photography, about its future. This is the latest one, it's probably 5 years old now, University of California Press. Our students are required to read this. I've edited a number of other books about subjects, one about fishing with photographs, another about Italy called Italy Observed, a book about the new Bauhaus, the Institute of Design. I've been active in all these kinds of things, but my real interest is getting my work out in books and publications which will last, getting them into libraries and into people's hands who can really see that the body of work is what counts, the bigger collection of work that a photographer makes. One picture tells you something, but 50 of them tell you something else. 80 more, 1,000, maybe there's some truth. This is a book called Charles Traub. It came out, I think, in '77, of work I did in Chicago after I graduated. And this is all people, in a way, in terms of the angles, in terms of the tonalities, the black and white. I was doing only black and white up to about 1976 or so. Again, about gestures, again, about the intimacy of what happens in front of the camera and people's desire, by the way, to be on display. People like to be seen. People like to be noticed. It's a little harder to do this kind of picture today because they all think you're exploiting them. This was the first big success I guess I had as a photographer, and it's still pretty well recognized. I just want to read you. Peter Bunell, he wrote, and this still holds true, I think, to most of my work, Vivid and compelling photographs, which are painful and provocative. They are poignant in their self-conscious stylization, and Traub is not without a sense of humor. Those ideas have held pretty constant through all of my creative work. Certainly all photographs are fantasies. All photographs are still lifes, something taken from movement, from motion, from a moment, and then made into a still life. And all photographs are conceptual if they're good. There's a concept in them. And that's pretty much my modus operandi up to this moment in history. There is no truth in photographs. They are a product of how they were framed, taken out of context, something. They are a representation of something, sometimes the fantasy, sometimes what the photographer thinks they're about is also not what they are about. And then 50 years later, we see things in them that no one ever would have imagined that they record. There are indeed facts in photographs, but not necessarily truth. I always photograph people. So the street photographer idea is just another dumb label that, sometimes we have to use just to categorize things that shouldn't be categorized or not really categorizable. This is some work I did in Paris. I had a Rolleiflex XL66, and I've always been interested in caricature and what people look like, how they react to the camera and to my gaze and to their gaze and so on and so forth. This was just sort of Les Français. It's up on the wall right now because I'm thinking about making a whole series of zines of all, about different projects from my history, and which would be probably 30, 40 different things. This is just one of hundreds of pictures made in both Chicago and New York from 1977 thereabouts to 1980. These were men and women on the streets of the Bowery and what they called Uptown in Chicago, which is similar to the Bowery was here. Today we call them homeless, vagrants, there's all kinds of terms for them. They were the dispossessed of the period. And I did sort of portraits, what I would guess call then maybe street portraits, candid but intimate. I'd like to do an exhibition of them on the Bowery. And I'm working on a book about this. The book is called Skid Row. These are another idea for a zine. The idea here is maybe do a zine, a set of series put together from all of my work, a series of pictures about the gaze. 3 of these things I've shown you are basically street in the biggest sense, but let's call them people in the real world witness instead of using that term street photography. I presently am working on one with Jan and Lyle Rexer about my vacant work, which are pictures I made looking in windows throughout COVID of vacant spaces. All of these are, I think all this group, there are probably 500 of these that I've taken over the last couple of years, over through COVID and these traumatic, delirious times that we have been in for the last 2.5 years. They're all vacant storefronts, almost, I think they're all in Manhattan. Most of them are lower Manhattan. Ironic that a bank space is now vacant. I put this text in here. Oh, dark, dark, dark. They all go into the dark. The vacant interstellar spaces, the vacant into the vacant. That's what I call the group. That's by the famous poet T.S. Eliot. These are all done with a cell phone, Apple 13. The show at the Brooklyn Rail is doing at Industry City will have 28 of this size mounted in a grid. I would like to do such a grid with maybe 100. This is a proof, again, of a little publication I want to do of this work. It's going to have a text in it by Lyle Rexer. I'll probably do about 500. It's a zine. This relates in a way to the previous group, though it's a whole different generation later. It's really about city life, what the city is as a place, and its downward throes at the same time, the hope for renewal and dignity. For me, it's serendipitous that what we find in the real world is more improbable, I think, than anything that my mind, and I think many others, could possibly create if you're really out there looking. And that's important to me, to find that serendipitous magic of confluence of action, people, things, products, whatever, that creates a whole new reality that one couldn't possibly conceive of. So that's what most of the history of my work is about. I think it's very hard to separate both an artist and an educator. In my case, and perhaps in many cases, I forget who it was, one of the great artists always said that every artist is really teaching, and that it's sort of an obligation of the artist to give back. I always felt that because I had great mentors, Ralph Eugene Meatyard and Aaron Siskin, Gary Winogrand, others, all who taught, all who were great active artists / photographers. Photographers created the culture of today's photographic interest. It came mostly from photographers. Photography, and what I now call the lens and screen arts, was always in the basement of every institution, both literally and figuratively. That is because darkrooms were also in the basement. But the idea that photography would be preeminent in the art MFA curriculum or in art schools was not even conceived. In my day, when I went to graduate school, which was 1969 at the Institute of Design in Chicago, it was really one of the very few schools that actually was engaging the graduate study of photography. The current generation has to know is that photography wasn't celebrated the way it is now. It was maybe it was a journalistic factor. It was a sort of afterthought of the creative visual world. Along came the Vietnam War, and we saw the power of photographic expression by many independent and journalistic, but also independent photographers like Larry Barrows and others. Photography and where it is now in the world of culture, the world of idea, is basically a function of photographers championing the art of photography and promoting it and taking it out of the basement. So I never had any problem not embracing the dual role. I've sort of always conceived of the fact that teaching was a way not to end up in a little cubicle working for somebody else, though that's not exactly how it works out. Alice Beck Odette, her picture, as you know, is in our lounge. We call it the Alice Beck Odette Lounge. And also the scholarships that we have, or grants, are in honor of Alice. She built the undergraduate department of the school, taught in this school for 50 years. And in 1986, I think, she asked me to teach a senior critique class. That was my introduction to SVA and to the photography program. And it actually is because of her that I was obviously connected to SVA. When the opportunity to build a graduate program, I accepted the job on a part-time basis. Immediately, we called ourselves Photography, Video, and Related Media. That related to the fact that we were digital. We had some early computers, and we had a lot of embracing with what was then the emerging computer arts program. Some of their teachers taught things for us and vice versa. By the way, we're, I think, the first program of its type to have Photoshop. We beta tested it. We had computers basically for every student at that time. The first class came in with 14 people, and I'm still very close to many of them, and they have mostly all been remarkably successful.
Current categories are rather abstract, but so this is from 2010.
Yeah, I remember that. Chris Callis did those.
Yeah.
There's Lyle. This poster reflects what the philosophy of the department. We would deal with all aspects of serious photography, preparing a student for many opportunities after they graduated, but always using, for lack of a better term, the fine art of serious photography as the base. That good photography is good photography. We learn about what art is by making good photography, and history tells us the rest. So these are all innovative practitioners, and I'm very proud of it when you really see how diverse and how it embraced all the things that we're embracing today. Our faculty has evolved, of course, from that original group, but Marvin is still here, Graham is still here. It's amazing how many people have stuck it out all the years that we've been in the process. I think we have 5 people still involved in pretty much the first or second year. We wanted to nurture a small group of people and who could make an impact on our contemporary cultural landscape. A good deal of my information about mediums of the lens and screen arts and culture and art and even literature comes from social media. I think pretty up to date on the subjects that I am involved with as a teacher, mentor, chairperson, whatever, because of social media. I look at social media, meaning mostly Instagram and Facebook to some extent, certainly my email. Probably spend an hour every day looking through those various apps. I read the several newspapers online. I don't read the whole things, but I scan for articles. Social media is one of those subjects that everybody really does engage, at least everybody of 21st century mentality. We criticize it, we get absorbed with it. Social media is going to change. I don't know exactly where it's going to go. I suspect there will be all kinds of algorithms, other things to help us vet those things that we need to vet more quickly, more readily, to filter and censor if necessary. We have to make choices and we have to be educated. We have to look at history. We have to understand how things repeat themselves and who's feeding it and who's cutting it off from us. AI is the major revolution of the moment, moving in a quantum way daily. The ability to make things, find out things, organize things, recreate things, plan things, make things happen, design things, is going to affect what we once knew as the pure old-fashioned photograph about actually what's true and not true, whether it was real or not real. I also have my fears of it, but I wouldn't let that hold me back from using it if I need to, and from educating my students and my colleagues in the world of the lens and screen arts. Have said it's the biggest revolution since 1837. I'm all for technology. I think if you really think, you ask the question, about digital culture, digital society, think of all the things you can do, all the things you do every day using the digital world. Even in the pandemic that just isn't quite over, but hopefully is moving over. Just imagine that we were able to function the way we were, simply because of technology. It has enabled people like me as an artist to make pictures I could otherwise never make, and pictures in the real world. Our real world is the digital world, is the world of information and data. It is parallel, obviously, to the analog world, but we live robustly in the digital age as a human culture. Being a digital image maker, a digital communicator, which we all are, allows us the ability to talk back, look back, reconfigure on our own terms, create our own hierarchies, our own authorities. We still need education. We still need to learn to think, and we need to learn to vet and to, use reason and logic and not accept everything just because we saw it on the computer. It's all about New York, how photographers saw it, what it is in space, its history, because we have so many non-native New Yorkers in our community. They need to learn about New York because it is their studio. I was pretty much a self-taught painter. I find a kind of relaxation and fulfillment in messing with the materials of paint. All of those were taken with a camera. They're all painted, all scenes. This one in particular is relevant today because it's a store window doing the vacant work, blotched up and stuff. And there's a lot added to it by my hand. I was always curious about marks and things and the abstractions that I was finding on the street in my wanderings and walkings and travels. So what I'm trying to get at is there's such a crossover. Does it matter what the medium is? You know, this is part of the lens of screen arts. It wouldn't have existed in my imagination per se. And it stimulated my other interests in abstraction, in the marks that people leave behind. And the vacant work is pretty much a pure photographic return from this kind of activity. So everything is connected in your creative pursuits, I think. And the issue with me finally in regard to this subject is that I really am, as a photographer, interested in realism. I'm interested, though it's all fantasy, of course, but it is from the real world, in describing what things look like, what things happened, what things connected or don't belong together, did belong together, and finding things. And I think that's the great discovery and the great magic of photography, the ability to render something into a picture that comes from reality but is transformed and is evolved in the making of it. Whereas I had no talents whatsoever as a painter, certainly not as a realist painter. Therefore, I'll leave all my abstraction basically to painting, which I can make any mark I want to make. If it's messy, it's messy. If it's not clear, I'll work with it. Composition, color, movement, meaning the movement in the frame, are all very important issues to any form of pictorial representation.